Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of flying. As a child, she would spend hours watching planes cross the sky above her small Texas town, imagining herself at the controls. Years of dedication, countless flight hours, and rigorous training had finally led her to this moment. At 28, she was the youngest pilot ever hired by Skyline Airways, a regional carrier known for its challenging mountain routes. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah arrived at the Denver hub early, her crisp blue uniform pressed to perfection. She had been assigned to Flight 447, a routine passenger run from Denver to Aspen. The Boeing 737 was loaded with 43 passengers, mostly business travelers and a few families heading for an early ski season vacation. Captain Robert Hayes, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, greeted Sarah in the cockpit. He had been flying these mountain routes since before she was born, and his weathered hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. Sarah respected him immensely, though she noticed he sometimes seemed skeptical of her abilities. "Weather's looking good today," Hayes said, checking the latest reports. "Clear skies, minimal wind. Should be a smooth flight." Sarah nodded, running through her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. Every switch, every gauge, every system had to be perfect. She had learned early in her career that in aviation, there was no room for mistakes. The passengers were boarding now, their cheerful chatter filtering back from the cabin. Flight attendant Lisa Chen poked her head into the cockpit. "We're ready for pushback," she announced. "Full load today, everyone seems excited about the weather." As they taxied toward the runway, Sarah felt the familiar rush of anticipation. This was her 15th flight with Skyline Airways, and each takeoff still gave her the same thrill she had felt during her first solo flight years ago. The tower cleared them for departure, and Hayes pushed the throttles forward. The plane lifted smoothly into the crisp Colorado morning. Below them, Denver sprawled like a miniature city, its buildings and streets forming neat geometric patterns. Sarah monitored the instruments as they climbed, everything operating within normal parameters. The flight plan would take them southwest through the Rocky Mountains, following established airways that threaded between the peaks. 30 minutes into the flight, they were cruising at 25,000 feet when the first sign of trouble appeared. A small warning light flickered on Sarah's control panel, indicating a minor hydraulic pressure drop. She frowned and tapped the gauge gently, wondering if it might be a sensor malfunction. "Captain, I'm seeing a slight hydraulic issue here," she reported to Hayes. He leaned over to look at her instruments, his expression immediately serious. "That's not good. Let's run the emergency checklist and see what we're dealing with." As they worked through the procedures, more warning lights began to illuminate. The hydraulic system that controlled the plane's flight surfaces was rapidly losing pressure. Without it, they would have difficulty controlling the aircraft's movement. Hayes reached for the radio to contact air traffic control, but before he could speak, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her side window, she could see fluid streaming from the wing, creating a fine mist in the aircraft's slipstream. "Captain," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "We have a major hydraulic leak. I can see it from here." The next few minutes would test everything Sarah had learned about flying, and everything she thought she knew about the people she worked with. As the situation rapidly deteriorated, she had no way of knowing that her response to this emergency would not only save lives but also expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the airline industry. The plane shuddered slightly as Hayes tried to maintain control with the degraded systems. In the passenger cabin, people were beginning to notice that something wasn't right. The usual smooth flight had become noticeably rougher, and those seated near the windows could see the fluid streaming from the aircraft. Sarah's mind raced through the emergency procedures she had memorized. They needed to declare an emergency and find the nearest suitable airport for landing. But as she reached for her headset to contact air traffic control, she couldn't have imagined that the voice that would soon crackle through their communication system would change everything about this flight and about her life. Hayes grabbed the radio microphone with shaking hands. "Denver Control, this is Skyline 447. We have a hydraulic emergency and need immediate vectors to the nearest airport for landing." The response came quickly from air traffic control. "Skyline 447, copy your emergency. We're showing Grand Junction Regional as your best option, bearing 270, distance 43 miles. Are you able to maintain current altitude?" Negative, Denver Control. We're having difficulty maintaining control. Beginning descent now, Hayes replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit temperature. Sarah worked frantically with the backup controls, trying to compensate for the failing hydraulic system. The plane was becoming increasingly difficult to maneuver, requiring both pilots to use maximum force on the control yokes. Her arms already ached from the physical effort required to keep the aircraft level. As they descended through 20,000 feet, Sarah noticed something strange. A black SUV was following their flight path on a highway below, keeping pace with their ground speed. It seemed like an odd coincidence, but she was too focused on the emergency to give it much thought. That's when the unexpected transmission came through their headsets. It wasn't from air traffic control or any official aviation frequency. The voice was crisp, professional, and completely unauthorized. Skyline 447, this is Phoenix Control. You are ordered to maintain current heading and continue descent to 15,000 feet. Do not deviate from instructions. Hayes and Sarah exchanged confused glances. There was no such thing as Phoenix Control on their flight plan, and no reason for any outside agency to be communicating with their aircraft during an emergency. Denver Control, did you copy that transmission? Hayes asked over the official frequency. Negative, Skyline 447. We show no other aircraft or facilities on your frequency. Please maintain heading to Grand Junction and continue descent as necessary for your emergency. The unauthorized voice came through again, more insistent this time. Skyline 447, this is Phoenix Control. You will comply with our directions immediately. Ignore all other communications. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone was trying to take control of their emergency response, and they had the capability to break into aircraft communications. This wasn't a random radio interference, it was deliberate and sophisticated. In the passenger cabin, flight attendant Lisa Chen was doing her best to keep everyone calm. She had noticed the unusual flight characteristics and could see the concern on passengers' faces. Some were gripping their armrests tightly, while others stared out the windows at the mountainous terrain below. Meanwhile, in a nondescript office building in Phoenix, Arizona, Marcus Webb sat before multiple computer screens showing real-time flight tracking data. He wore a wireless headset and spoke in the calm, authoritative tone that Sarah and Hayes were hearing in their cockpit. Target is responding as expected, he reported to his supervisor, a woman in an expensive suit who watched from behind his chair. The hydraulic failure was triggered on schedule. They should be ready for extraction within the next 10 minutes. Webb was part of a covert operation that had been months in the planning. Sarah Martinez wasn't just any pilot. She had stumbled upon irregularities in Skyline Airways maintenance records during her brief time with the company. Her attention to detail and dedication to safety had led her to discover that several aircraft were being flown with expired parts and falsified inspection reports. What Sarah didn't know was that her discovery threatened a multi-million-dollar conspiracy involving Skyline Airways management, their parts suppliers, and several government officials. The hydraulic failure on Flight 447 wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated event designed to discredit her as a pilot and permanently silence her concerns about the airline's safety. Violations back in the cockpit, Sarah made a decision that would prove crucial. Instead of following either set of instructions, she switched to an emergency frequency used by military aircraft. Her father had been an Air Force pilot, and she remembered him mentioning this frequency during her childhood. Any military aircraft in the vicinity, this is civilian aircraft Skyline 447 with hydraulic emergency. We are receiving unauthorized communications and request assistance. The response was immediate. Skyline 447, this is Air Force Rescue 23. We copy your emergency and unusual circumstances. We are scrambling interceptors to your location. Continue on your current heading and ignore all unauthorized communications. Marcus Webb watched his screens with growing alarm as military radar signatures appeared on his display. The operation was not going according to plan. He turned to his supervisor with worry etched across his face. Ma'am, we have military intervention. The Air Force is responding to their distress call. The woman in the expensive suit smiled coldly. Then we proceed to Phase 2. Signal the ground team. If we can't control the aircraft remotely, we'll have to bring it down another way. Sarah had no idea that her quick thinking had just escalated the situation dramatically. As Flight 447 continued its descent toward Grand Junction Regional Airport, she focused on keeping the damaged aircraft under control. unaware that several different groups were now converging on their location with very different intentions for how this emergency would end. Two F-16 fighter jets appeared alongside Flight 447 within minutes of Sarah's military emergency call. The lead pilot, Major Jennifer Cole, positioned her aircraft off the commercial plane's left wing where Sarah could see her clearly. Through hand signals and radio communication, Major Cole confirmed that she could see the hydraulic fluid streaming from the damaged aircraft. Skyline 447, this is Rescue 23 lead. We have visual confirmation of your hydraulic leak. We're going to escort you to Grand Junction, but I need you to know we're tracking several ground vehicles that appear to be following your flight path. This may not be a simple mechanical failure. Sarah's heart pounded as the implications sank in. Someone had deliberately sabotaged their aircraft, and now ground teams were positioning themselves along their route. She glanced at Captain Hayes, who was struggling with the increasingly unresponsive controls. "Sarah," Hayes said through gritted teeth, "I need you to take primary control. My arms are cramping up and you're stronger right now." For the first time in her career, Sarah found herself as the primary pilot of a commercial aircraft in an emergency situation. The weight of 43 passenger lives pressed down on her shoulders as she gripped the control yoke firmly. In the passenger cabin, businessman David Park noticed the military jets through his window. He had been nervous about the rough flight, but seeing fighter planes alongside them made his stomach drop. He quietly pulled out his phone and began recording, despite the flight attendant's earlier instructions about electronic devices. Several rows behind him, Dr. Emily Foster, a trauma surgeon heading to Aspen for a conference, recognized the signs of a serious in-flight emergency. She unbuckled her seatbelt and made her way to the front of the cabin, where Lisa Chen was trying to maintain order. "I'm a doctor," Dr. Foster said quietly to the flight attendant. "If this gets worse, I want you to know I'm here to help." Meanwhile, on the ground, Marcus Webb's operation was falling apart. The military escort had complicated their plans significantly, and the Air Force was now coordinating with the FBI to investigate the unauthorized radio communications. Webb received new orders through his encrypted earpiece. "Phoenix Control to all ground units," he transmitted. "Execute Contingency Plan Delta. Repeat, execute Contingency Plan Delta." This was the signal for their most dangerous backup plan. 3 miles from Grand Junction Regional Airport, a team of men dressed as airport maintenance workers began setting up what appeared to be routine runway equipment. In reality, they were positioning a device that would interfere with the aircraft's remaining navigation systems, potentially causing Flight 447 to crash during landing approach. Sarah was completely unaware of the ground situation as she fought to maintain control of the aircraft. The hydraulic system was now completely failed, and they were flying on manual backup controls only. Every adjustment required enormous physical effort, and she could feel her strength beginning to fade. "Grand Junction Tower, this is Skyline 447, she radioed. "We are approximately 15 miles out with complete hydraulic failure. We'll need emergency vehicles standing by and a long final approach for landing." "Skyline 447, Grand Junction Tower. We have all emergency services on standby. Winds are calm. Runway 30 is cleared for your approach. You have priority landing clearance." Major Cole's voice crackled through their headsets. "Skyline 447, be advised we're seeing suspicious activity near the airport. Our ground team is investigating, but you should be prepared for anything." As they approached the airport, Sarah could see the emergency vehicles lined up along the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and airport rescue equipment were all in position. What she couldn't see was the small team of saboteurs who had infiltrated the airport's perimeter. At 8 miles out, the unexpected happened. The aircraft's navigation system suddenly began showing erratic readings, displaying impossible directions and altitudes. Sarah realized immediately that someone was jamming their instruments electronically. "They're messing with our navigation," she told Hayes and Major Cole simultaneously. "I'm going to have to land this visually with no instrument guidance." Landing a commercial aircraft with complete hydraulic failure was already extremely difficult. Doing it without reliable instruments while under electronic attack was nearly impossible. Sarah had trained for emergency landings throughout her career, but nothing had prepared her for this combination of mechanical failure and deliberate sabotage. Captain Hayes, despite his exhaustion, began calling out altitude and speed readings from the few instruments that still appeared to be functioning correctly. 500 feet, speed 140 knots. "Looking good, Sarah, you've got this." In the cabin, passengers could sense that something was seriously wrong. The plane was descending much more steeply than normal, and the engines were making unusual sounds as Sarah used them to help control their descent rate. Several people were quietly praying, while others gripped their seats in silent terror. Dr. Foster moved through the cabin, quickly identifying passengers who might need medical attention after landing. She spotted an elderly man who appeared to be having chest pains from stress and a pregnant woman who looked very pale. She made mental notes about where they were seated for immediate post-landing care. David Park continued recording through his window, capturing footage of the F-16 escorts and the approaching runway. He had no idea that his video would later become crucial evidence in the investigation of what was being called the most sophisticated attack on civilian aviation in decades. As the runway grew larger in Sarah's windscreen, she prepared for the most challenging landing of her career, completely unaware that even if she managed to get the plane down safely, their ordeal was far from over. Sarah lined up the aircraft with runway 30, her hands gripping the control yoke so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Without hydraulic assistance, the plane required constant correction to maintain proper alignment. The emergency vehicles below grew larger as they descended through 200 feet. 100 feet, speed 130, Hayes called out. "Little left, Sarah. You're drifting right." She pulled back gently on the controls, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly to her inputs. At 50 feet above the runway, a new voice suddenly burst through their headsets. Not the unauthorized Phoenix control, but someone else entirely. "Skyline 447, abort landing immediately." "Pull up! Pull up!" "The runway is compromised." The voice belonged to FBI agent Rachel Morrison, who had arrived at Grand Junction Airport just minutes earlier as part of the federal investigation into the unauthorized communications. Her team had discovered the electronic jamming equipment disguised as maintenance gear near the runway approach. Sarah faced an impossible decision. She was committed to landing with an aircraft that might not be able to climb again if she aborted. But the warning suggested the runway itself might be dangerous. In that split second, she made a choice that would save everyone aboard. "Going around," she announced, pushing the throttles forward and pulling back on the control yoke. The aircraft groaned under the stress, climbing slowly away from the runway. Below them, Agent Morrison's team was storming the fake maintenance position. The saboteurs scattered, leaving behind their electronic equipment and revealing the true extent of the plot against Flight 447. Among the abandoned gear, agents found detailed plans showing not just the hydraulic sabotage, but also a backup plan to cause the aircraft to crash during landing. Marcus Webb watched his entire operation collapse from his Phoenix control room. The woman in the expensive suit was already gathering her files and preparing to leave. Their conspiracy to silence Sarah Martinez had failed spectacularly, and now they faced federal investigation. "Destroy everything," she ordered. "We never existed." Back in the air, Sarah was fighting the most difficult battle of her aviation career. The aircraft had used most of its remaining energy in the aborted landing, and she wasn't sure they could maintain altitude long enough to set up another approach. Worse, the electronic jamming was continuing, making it nearly impossible to know their exact position or speed. Major Cole, still flying escort in her F-16, became Sarah's eyes and voice. "Skyline 447, you're at 800 feet. Speed appears to be 120. I can guide you through another approach if you're ready to try again." "Negative," Sarah replied, making another crucial decision. "We're going to land in the field beyond the runway. It's our only chance." The choice was desperate but logical. The aircraft was losing altitude and wouldn't be able to maintain flight much longer. An emergency landing in the open field would be rough, but it would avoid whatever dangers awaited them on the compromised runway. In the passenger cabin, Dr. Foster had taken charge of emergency preparations. She moved quickly through the aisles, instructing passengers on proper crash position and identifying those who might need immediate medical attention after impact. Her calm, professional demeanor helped keep panic from spreading. "Listen to me, everyone," she announced. "We're going to make an emergency landing in a field. Follow the flight attendant's instructions exactly. Remove your shoes, take off any sharp jewelry, and when we tell you, assume the crash position and hold it until we come to a complete stop." David Park had stopped recording and was now helping an elderly passenger prepare for impact. The businessman who had been worried about his meeting in Aspen was now focused solely on survival. His priorities dramatically shifted by the reality of their situation. Sarah could see the field approaching rapidly. It was roughly level farmland, recently harvested, which meant fewer obstacles but potentially soft soil that could catch the landing gear. She had one chance to get this right. 30 seconds to touchdown, she called to the cabin. Flight attendants, take your seats now. The aircraft descended toward the field at a much steeper angle than a normal landing. Sarah fought to keep the wings level as they approached the ground, knowing that any significant deviation could cause the plane to cartwheel and break apart. 20 feet, Hayes called out. Looking good, Sarah, you're going to make it. The main landing gear touched down first, sending a violent shudder through the aircraft. Sarah immediately cut the engines and deployed the emergency brakes. Though she knew they would have limited effectiveness without hydraulic power, the plane bounced once, then settled onto all three landing gear, plowing across the soft field. Inside the cabin, passengers were thrown forward against their seatbelts as the aircraft rapidly decelerated. The sound was terrifying, metal groaning, dirt and debris hitting the fuselage, and the occasional bang as they hit an unseen obstacle in the field. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually less than 30 seconds, Flight 447 came to a complete stop in the middle of the Colorado farmland. For a moment, there was absolute silence except for the clicking sounds of cooling metal and the distant sound of approaching sirens. Sarah sat in her pilot's seat, her hands still gripping the controls, hardly believing they had survived. Around her, 43 passengers and 4 crew members were alive, though shaken and some injured from the rough landing. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. As emergency vehicles raced across the field toward them, Sarah had no idea that the people who had tried to kill them were already planning their next move. The conspiracy that had started with falsified maintenance records was about to become something much more dangerous and far-reaching. The emergency evacuation of Flight 447 proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Dr. Foster coordinated medical triage while flight attendant Lisa Chen supervised the passenger evacuation through the aircraft's emergency slides. Within 10 minutes of landing, everyone was safely outside the aircraft and emergency medical teams were treating the injured. Sarah remained in the cockpit with Captain Hayes, both of them drained from the physical and emotional stress of the emergency landing. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, and she could barely believe they had all survived. Sarah, Hayes said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. I've been flying for 24 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You saved everyone on this plane. Before she could respond, FBI agent Morrison appeared at the cockpit door. She was a tall woman with serious eyes and an authoritative presence that immediately commanded attention. Ms. Martinez, Captain Hayes, I'm Agent Morrison with the FBI. I need to speak with both of you immediately about what happened today. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. This was a deliberate attempt to bring down your aircraft. They were escorted to a mobile command center that had been rapidly set up near the crash site. Inside, Sarah learned for the first time about the scope of the conspiracy against her. Agent Morrison showed them evidence of the electronic jamming equipment, the unauthorized radio communications, and most shocking of all, documentation proving that her aircraft had been deliberately sabotaged. Ms. Martinez, Agent Morrison explained, we believe this attack was orchestrated because of your discovery of maintenance irregularities at Skyline Airways. Someone wanted to silence you permanently. Sarah felt sick as the full implications became clear. Her dedication to safety had made her a target, and 43 innocent passengers had nearly paid the price for her integrity. We've been investigating Skyline Airways for months, the agent continued. Your reports about falsified maintenance records were the brake we needed to move forward with our case. Unfortunately, our investigation triggered this extreme response. Meanwhile, at a luxury hotel in Phoenix, the woman in the expensive suit was holding an emergency meeting with several other conspirators. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she was the chief financial officer of Meridian Parts Corporation, the company that supplied aircraft components to dozens of airlines including Skyline Airways. The operation was a complete failure, she announced to the assembled group. Martinez is alive, the FBI has our equipment, and the whole conspiracy is about to be exposed. Around the table sat representatives from Skyline Airways' executive team, several FAA officials who had been taking bribes to overlook safety violations, and the heads of 2 other parts manufacturing companies. Together, they had been making millions of dollars by selling substandard aircraft parts and covering up the safety risks. "We need to activate the final protocol," said James Kellerman, Skyline Airways CEO. "If we can't stop the investigation, we need to disappear entirely." The final protocol was their most extreme contingency plan, the complete destruction of all evidence and the elimination of key witnesses. They had prepared for this possibility, though none of them had believed it would ever be necessary. Back at the crash site, Sarah was being briefed on the extent of the conspiracy when Agent Morrison received an urgent phone call. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she listened to the voice on the other end. "We have a problem," she announced after hanging up. "Our surveillance teams have lost contact with several key suspects. Victoria Ashford and James Kellerman have both disappeared from their known locations." Sarah felt a new wave of fear wash over her. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they're not finished trying to silence you. We're going to need to put you in protective custody immediately." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah was moved to a secure location while FBI teams raided offices across 3 states, gathering evidence of the massive fraud scheme. The media had picked up the story of the dramatic emergency landing, but they didn't yet know about the conspiracy behind it. David Park's cell phone video of the F-16 escort and landing had gone viral on social media, with millions of people praising Sarah's piloting skills. She had become an overnight hero, though she felt anything but heroic. The weight of nearly losing 43 lives was crushing, even though she had ultimately saved them all. At the secure FBI facility, Sarah was given a full briefing on the conspiracy. The falsified maintenance records she had discovered were just the tip of the iceberg. The criminal organization had been operating for over 5 years, putting thousands of passengers at risk to maximize their profits. "Your courage in reporting those maintenance issues may have prevented dozens of future crashes," Agent Morrison told her. "But it also put you at the center of a very dangerous situation." That evening, as Sarah tried to process everything that had happened, she received an encrypted message on a secure phone provided by the FBI. The message was simple but chilling. "You should have stayed quiet. This isn't over." Victoria Ashford and her conspirators had escaped the initial FBI raids, and they were clearly planning another attempt to silence Sarah permanently. The dramatic emergency landing had been just the beginning of Sarah's fight for survival against a criminal organization that would stop at nothing to protect their multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. As night fell over Colorado, Sarah realized that her career as a pilot had changed forever. She was no longer just an aviator. She was the key witness in one of the largest aviation safety conspiracies in history, and there were powerful people who wanted her dead. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, Sarah found herself living in a safe house outside Denver, surrounded by FBI protection. The media attention had been overwhelming, with reporters camping outside her apartment and calling her a hero pilot. But Sarah knew the real story was far more complicated and dangerous than the public realized. Agent Morrison visited her daily with updates on the investigation. The FBI had uncovered a massive network of corruption involving not just Skyline Airways and Meridian Parts Corporation, but also officials in the Federal Aviation Administration who had been paid to ignore safety violations. "We've identified 17 aircraft currently in service with the defective parts," Morrison explained during one of their meetings. "All of them have been grounded pending inspection. Your discovery has potentially saved hundreds of lives." Despite this positive news, the main conspirators remained at large. Victoria Ashford, James Kellerman, and 3 other key figures had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty offices and closed bank accounts. The FBI suspected they had fled the country using false identities. Sarah's life had been turned upside down. She couldn't return to work, couldn't go home, and couldn't even contact her family without FBI supervision. The price of doing the right thing had been higher than she ever imagined. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Foster had become an unexpected ally. The trauma surgeon who had helped during the emergency landing was now working with the FBI to document the psychological impact of the attack on the passengers. Her medical expertise and first-hand experience made her a valuable witness. "The passengers are struggling," Dr. Foster reported to Agent Morrison. "Several have developed PTSD from the experience. They deserve to know that their trauma was caused by deliberate criminal action, not just a random mechanical failure." David Park, the businessman who had recorded the emergency landing, had been working with federal prosecutors to prepare his testimony. His video footage provided crucial evidence of the military escort and the aircraft's condition during the crisis. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, the man who had operated the unauthorized Phoenix Control Communications, had been arrested trying to leave the country. Faced with multiple federal charges, he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He's willing to testify about the entire operation, Agent Morrison told Sarah. But he's also provided us with intelligence that Ashford and her team are planning one final attempt to eliminate key witnesses. The threat was specific and immediate. Webb had revealed that the conspirators had hired professional assassins and were planning to strike within the next few days. The FBI's protective detail around Sarah was immediately increased. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of the safe house looking out at the Colorado mountains and thinking about how her life had changed so dramatically. 6 months ago, she had been a young pilot excited about her new job. Now she was the target of a criminal organization and the key witness in a federal case that could result in dozens of prison sentences. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Agent Morrison burst into the room, her weapon drawn. "We need to move you now," she said urgently. "Our perimeter has been breached." Through the darkness, Sarah could see armed figures moving through the trees around the safe house. The final confrontation that Marcus Webb had warned about was beginning. "There's a helicopter on the way," Morrison explained as she led Sarah through the house toward a rear exit. "We just need to get you to the landing zone." As they moved through the darkness, Sarah could hear gunfire erupting around the property. The FBI agents assigned to protect her were engaged in a fierce battle with the hired assassins sent by Victoria Ashford's organization. They reached the designated helicopter landing zone, a clearing about 200 yards from the safe house. Sarah could see the aircraft approaching in the distance, its searchlight cutting through the night. But between them and safety, armed figures were emerging from the tree line. "Stay behind me," Morrison ordered, raising her weapon. The next few minutes were terrifying. Sarah found herself crouched behind a fallen log while FBI agents and hired killers exchanged gunfire around her. The sound of bullets whistling overhead brought back memories of the aircraft emergency. But this time the danger was even more immediate and personal. The helicopter touched down in the clearing, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and debris. Morrison grabbed Sarah's arm and they ran toward the aircraft, staying low to avoid the ongoing gunfight. Just as they reached the helicopter, Sarah heard Morrison cry out behind her. The agent had been hit in the shoulder but was still moving, pushing Sarah toward the aircraft door. "Get in," Morrison shouted over the rotor noise. "We'll hold them off." Sarah climbed into the helicopter, turning back to see Morrison and the other agents forming a defensive line around the landing zone. As the aircraft lifted off, she watched the muzzle flashes of weapons fire growing smaller below them. The pilot, a federal marshal named Tom Rodriguez, spoke to her through the headset communication system. "We're taking you to a military facility for enhanced protection. The situation has escalated beyond what civilian law enforcement can handle." As they flew through the night toward an undisclosed location, Sarah realized that the conspiracy she had uncovered had grown into something resembling a war. Victoria Ashford and her criminal organization were willing to kill federal agents and attack government safe houses to protect their secrets. But Sarah also knew that she wouldn't back down. Too many lives had been lost to aviation accidents caused by defective parts and falsified maintenance records. If her testimony could prevent future tragedies, she would see this fight through to the end, no matter how dangerous it became. 6 months later, Sarah stood in federal court in Denver, facing the largest aviation safety trial in decades. The courtroom was packed with families of crash victims, aviation safety experts, and journalists from around the world. After months of investigation and preparation, the conspiracy that had nearly cost her life was finally being exposed to public scrutiny. Victoria Ashford sat at the defendant's table, no longer the confident executive who had orchestrated the attack on Flight 447. She had been captured 3 months earlier in a small coastal town in Mexico, living under a false identity. The woman who had once commanded a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise now faced life in prison. "The evidence will show," announced federal prosecutor Michael Chen, "that the defendants deliberately sold defective aircraft parts to commercial airlines, falsified safety records, and when their crimes were about to be exposed, they attempted to murder the brave pilot who discovered their conspiracy." Sarah's testimony was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. She described in detail how she had discovered the maintenance irregularities, the sabotage of Flight 447, and the dramatic emergency landing that had saved 43 lives. Her voice was steady and strong, showing no trace of the fear she had felt during those terrifying hours in the cockpit. Captain Robert Hayes also testified, describing Sarah's extraordinary piloting skills during the emergency. "In my 24 years of flying," he told the jury, "I have never witnessed such courage and competence under pressure. Ms. Martinez saved every life on that aircraft." Dr. Emily Foster provided medical testimony about the passenger's trauma, while David Park's viral video was played for the jury, showing the military escort and the aircraft's condition during the crisis. The evidence painted a clear picture of a deliberate attack on civilian aviation. Marcus Webb, the former Phoenix control operator, had become the prosecution's star witness. His detailed testimony revealed the full scope of the conspiracy, including the names of corrupt FAA officials and the systematic cover-up of safety violations. "We were making so much money from the defective parts scheme," Webb testified, "that when Ms. Martinez threatened to expose us, Mrs. Ashford said we had to eliminate her permanently. The hydraulic sabotage was meant to cause a crash that would look like pilot error." The defense attorneys tried to portray the incident as a simple mechanical failure, but the evidence against their clients was overwhelming. The FBI had recovered the electronic jamming equipment, recorded communications between the conspirators, and financial records showing millions of dollars in illegal payments. Agent Rachel Morrison, who had recovered from her gunshot wound during the safe house attack, testified about the extensive federal investigation. "This conspiracy put thousands of passengers at risk over a 5-year period," she told the jury. The defendants were willing to kill to protect their criminal enterprise. On the final day of testimony, James Kellerman, the former CEO of Skyline Airways, took the stand in his own defense. Under cross-examination, he broke down and admitted his role in the conspiracy. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt," he said, tears streaming down his face. "It started with just a few questionable parts to save money. But then it snowballed, and Victoria convinced us that we had to protect ourselves." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Victoria Ashford was sentenced to life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and aviation safety violations. James Kellerman received 35 years, while the other conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. After the trial, Sarah returned to flying, but with a new mission. She had been hired by the National Transportation Safety Board as a special investigator for aviation safety violations. Her experience had made her one of the most qualified people in the country to identify and prevent the kind of conspiracy that had nearly killed her. The passengers of Flight 447 had formed a support group, with Dr. Foster providing ongoing counseling for those dealing with trauma from the experience. Many of them had attended the trial and expressed their gratitude to Sarah for saving their lives. David Park had written a book about the experience, with proceeds going to aviation safety research. His account of the emergency landing and the subsequent investigation became a bestseller, raising public awareness about the importance of aircraft maintenance standards. The case led to sweeping reforms in aviation safety oversight. The FAA implemented new procedures for parts certification and maintenance record verification. Congress passed legislation requiring more stringent background checks for aviation industry personnel and increased penalties for safety violations. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Sarah was approached by a young woman who looked strikingly similar to her younger self, a new pilot, full of dreams and dedication to aviation safety. "Ms. Martinez," the young pilot said, "I just wanted to thank you. Because of what you did, people like me can pursue our careers knowing that someone is watching out for passenger safety." Sarah smiled, thinking about how her life had changed since that October morning, when she had first noticed the maintenance irregularities in Skyline Airways records. The price of speaking up had been enormous: months of fear, the loss of her privacy, and the trauma of nearly losing her life. But as she watched the young pilot walk away, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. The skies were safer now because she had refused to stay quiet. 43 passengers were alive because she had fought to save them, and hundreds of future travelers would never know how close they had come to disaster. because she had exposed the conspiracy that threatened them all. The mission was complete, but Sarah's commitment to aviation safety would continue for the rest of her career. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing a pilot can do isn't just fly the plane. It's having the courage to speak up when something is wrong, no matter what the personal cost might be.